Hi, Jonathan York, Bay Financial Partners, looking at investment markets. Pretty interesting time out there still for the US equity market. You've got the Fed announcing that they're going to start the taper later this month, with more than likely a further sort of reduction in December as well. And that gradual removal of the sort of support for the market through asset purchases looks like it will culminate in the first rate hike in the US in around August of 2022. Now, certainly the Fed sort of walking a bit of a fine sort of line out there, balancing act really, because you've still got pretty major inflation out there in the US. They're still saying it's transitory and will start to ease sort of next year. And potentially one sort of hint that maybe the inflation is sort of peaking is the Baltic Dry Index, which is a sort of shipping index, sort of goods being shipped around the world, and that's fallen by around 50% in the last sort of 3 to 4 weeks. But in the US as well, you've still got the issue with sort of jobs out there. You've got, potentially around sort of 10 million odd jobs, but only around sort of 8.5, 9 million people actually looking for employment. So certainly it's not a normal sort of job market out there, and it's just going to be interesting to see how it does sort of play out, because certainly the COVID pandemic has sort of realigned people's thoughts on sort of working, etc. Whereas, people were working maybe 2 or 3 jobs with the pandemic, obviously, and the sort of shutdowns. Now realizing that potentially you don't have to work that much. Also, as well, on the positive news, there was a very good virtual meeting between the US and China, President Biden and Xi Jinping. And again, it's sort of the realization that both countries need each other in order for their economies to continue to grow. So it will be interesting now to see if we get that sort of year-end rally, potentially sort of mid-November. Obviously, next week you've got Thanksgiving, and it's just going to be interesting now to see if we do get that year-end rally. Just on the crypto side, it's interesting. Bitcoin's taken another pretty big hit, sort of just around that sort of 60,000 now, and potentially with increased regulation coming through, it'd just be interesting to see how the cryptos trade. Oil backed off its highs a little bit, but it's still sort of hovering around that sort of $80 a barrel. Now in the UK, after an initial sort of spike in cases as sort of winter started to kick in, those cases now have started to come off their highs, and hospitalizations as well aren't quite as much as they were a couple of weeks ago. But Stanley still got supply chain issues in the UK with sort of the lorry drivers, etc. And certainly heading into the Christmas period, it's going to be very interesting to see how that sort of plays through. But adding to the issues in the UK, as if they didn't have enough to sort of worry about, had a further terrorist attack as well. Now, Europe appears to be back on sort of the epicenter of the sort of COVID outbreak in the Northern Hemisphere, and it's just going to be very interesting to see how it does play out over the winter months. It's only one country, Austria, has gone to sort of pretty extreme measures where all unvaccinated citizens are in lockdown. Here in Australia, restrictions continue to be relaxed, and certainly the Australian economy does look in pretty good shape. We've got the RBA expected to announce that they sort of started their taper in sort of February 2022. With potentially a first sort of rate increase around sort of July to August 2022. Now, certainly that will give the first half of 2022 plenty of time for the Australian economy to catch up, because, really, it's really been a laggard over the last year. But then, if you look at the restrictions that have been placed on New South Wales and Victoria, Sydney and Melbourne, certainly Melbourne spent over 200 days in lockdown. Now, here in New Zealand, Auckland has just passed its 90th day in lockdown, but there does appear to be light at the end of the tunnel, although the government is sort of backtracking, and certainly the Prime Minister is backtracking pretty hard now on this sort of Freedom Day as being November the 29th. The issue they've got in Auckland, and it's certainly with most of the hospitality, etc. They've been in lockdown for so long now. They really can't afford to be in lockdown for too much longer. And indeed, some of the sort of bars and restaurants are just saying, come December the 1st, they are opening. And given that, and obviously, the abilities for people to be able to travel over the Christmas period, the sort of COVID passport should be announced and sort of active later this week. Now, with that vaccination passport, that will then allow sort of hospitality, etc., to be able to open up and obviously sort of kickstart the economy, which has really certainly been lacking over the last sort of 2 to 3 months, especially in Auckland. As we do head into that Christmas period, that'll be a lifeline to many businesses. As with other central banks, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand faces a pretty sort of fine balancing act. Certainly inflation is out there in the economy at present. Will it be short term or slightly longer term? And potentially, is there a further rate hike to come before year end? Because you do have to weigh that up, I say, against businesses that really are struggling pretty hard over this sort of last 2 to 3 months with the sort of lockdown and the COVID restrictions, and it's going to be very difficult to sort of increase rates. Just in the fixed income space, though, it's interesting now. A few bonds are coming through. There was the Contact sort of green bond that came in at sort of 4.33 as an interest rate, and most of the bonds now are coming through at sort of high threes or sort of low fours. So certainly there is a little bit of a sort of light at the end of the tunnel for investors who are looking for income. Now, if you are looking for income options, there are plenty of alternatives available out there. You can go to the website www.bayfinancialpartners.co.nz for lots of interesting articles, and we look forward to speaking to you soon.